My wife spent $8,000 on her brother's birthday, but gave me a gas station keychain for our anniversary. So I spoiled myself by removing her from my bank account. And my life. Rachel and I had been together for 12 years, married for 7. I made $130,000 a year as an engineer, while she worked part-time at a flower shop for minimum wage. I paid for everything. Mortgage, bills, groceries, her car, insurance, everything. Never complained because that's what partners do. But the gifts she gave me were insulting. For my 30th birthday, she gave me a pair of socks from the dollar store. They still had the clearance sticker on them. 99 cents. I thought you needed socks, she said. Meanwhile, for her sister's birthday that same month, she bought a designer purse that cost $800. Used my credit card for it. Lisa really wanted this specific bag, she explained. On our first anniversary, she gave me a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest husband." It was chipped. She'd gotten it from a thrift store. For our 5th anniversary, she forgot entirely until I mentioned it, then ran to the gas station and came back with a car air freshener. "Pine scent," she said proudly. "Your favorite." I'd never said pine was my favorite anything. Christmas was the worst. She'd give me things like expired candy she found in the back of the pantry, wrapped in newspaper. One year, she gave me my own shirt back, claiming she thought it was new. Her family got gaming consoles, jewelry, and vacation packages. She spent $4,000 on a weekend trip for her parents' anniversary, but told me we couldn't afford a dinner date for ours. The pattern was so obvious, but whenever I brought it up, she'd say, "You're being materialistic. Gifts aren't about money. They're about thought." Except there was no thought in my gifts. She'd literally grab whatever was closest on the way home. A pen from the bank, a free calendar from the insurance company, a sample bottle of shampoo from a hotel we'd never stayed at. For her brother's wedding gift, she spent $3,000 on their honeymoon fund. Her excuse was always the same. They're blood family. They need more support. That hurt every time because she knew I was adopted. My adoptive parents died when I was 25, and Rachel's family was supposed to be my family too. But she made it clear with every terrible gift that I wasn't really part of it. For my 40th birthday, I thought maybe she'd finally do something meaningful. It was a milestone birthday. She talked about it for weeks, saying she had something special planned. The day came, and she handed me an envelope. Inside was a printed coupon for a free oil change that had expired 2 years ago. "I thought you could still use it," she said. "Maybe they'll honor it anyway." That same week, she threw her mom a surprise party that cost $6,000. Catered food, professional photographer, custom cake, the works. She used our joint savings account for it. "Mom deserves the best," she said when I saw the bank statement. I started keeping track after that. In 1 year, she spent $23,000 on gifts for her family. For me, the person paying for her entire life, she spent maybe $40 total. And that was being generous, counting the gas station purchases. The breaking point came at Christmas last year. We were at her parents' house for their big family gift exchange. Rachel had been secretive about my gift, refusing to let me see it. "It's a surprise," she kept saying. "Something you'll never expect." The family gathered around the tree. Rachel's brother opened his gift first. She'd gotten him a new laptop. Top of the line, $3,000. Her sister got diamond earrings. Her parents got a week-long cruise. Then it was my turn. Everyone watched as I opened this huge box she'd wrapped elaborately. Inside was another box. Then another. 5 boxes deep, I finally got to the actual gift. It was a used book about trains from a garage sale, price tag still on it, 25 cents. "Because you took the train once last year," she explained. I remembered. The room was silent. Her mom tried to change the subject. "Let's see what else is under the tree." But Kyle's wife, Julia, suddenly spoke up. "Rachel, what the hell is wrong with you?" Everyone turned to stare at Julia. Rachel looked shocked. "What do you mean?" Julia stood up. "This man pays for your entire life and you gave him a garage sale book? Are you serious right now?" Rachel got defensive. "It's thoughtful. He mentioned trains." Julia laughed. "He mentioned trains? You gave Kyle a $3,000 laptop and your husband, who funds your whole existence, gets a quarter book?" Rachel's dad cleared his throat. "Julia has a point. This seems unbalanced." Rachel turned red. "You don't understand. He doesn't care about gifts. He's not materialistic like that." I finally spoke. I looked around the room at all of them. Rachel's family, who'd eaten fancy meals I paid for, who'd gone on trips I funded, who'd opened expensive gifts my money bought. I kept my voice calm and steady. "You're absolutely right, Rachel. I'm not materialistic at all. That's why I've spent 12 years accepting being treated like I don't matter while I funded your entire family's lifestyle." The room went completely quiet. Nobody moved. Rachel's face turned bright red and she opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Jacob shifted in his chair and cleared his throat again. Maybe we should discuss this privately. This is a family gathering. Julia cut him off before Rachel could respond. No. This needed to be said publicly, because the gift-giving happened publicly. Everyone here just watched Rachel give her husband a 25-cent book, while Kyle got a $3,000 laptop. Kyle was staring at the laptop in his hands like he'd never seen it before. His fingers traced the edge of the screen and he looked sick. Rachel jumped up from her spot on the floor. You're trying to embarrass me in front of my family. How dare you? Julia laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Rachel, you embarrassed him. You gave him a quarter book from a garage sale after he's paid for everything in your life for over a decade. The mortgage, the bills, your car, everything. Alyssa started crying. She put her hand over her mouth and rushed out of the room. I heard her footsteps going up the stairs, then a door slamming. Lisa was staring at the diamond earrings in her lap. Jacob looked at the cruise tickets on the coffee table. Nobody was looking at Rachel except Julia. I stood up. My legs felt steady, which surprised me because my hands were shaking. I'm done being treated like an ATM with no feelings. I'm removing your access to my bank accounts right now, tonight. Rachel laughed, but it sounded nervous and high-pitched. You're overreacting. We can talk about this at home. I was already walking toward the door. I grabbed my coat from the rack in the hallway. Rachel called after me, but I didn't stop. I got in my car and drove home through empty streets. Everyone was inside with their families, celebrating Christmas. The house was dark when I got there. I turned on the lights and went straight to my office. I opened my laptop and started searching. Divorce attorneys near me. How to separate joint bank accounts. How to remove spouse from credit cards. I made a list of everything I needed to do. It was almost midnight when I finished. Rachel didn't come home that night. I knew she was staying at her parents' house, probably crying to them about how mean I was being. I didn't care anymore. The day after Christmas, I woke up early. The bank opened at 9 and I was there at 8:55. The manager saw me right away. He was professional about it, didn't ask questions, but I could tell he sensed what was happening. He pulled up my accounts on his computer. I need to remove my wife from all of these. Checking, savings, credit cards, everything. He nodded and started typing. I'll need to see your ID. I handed it over. He worked quickly, clicking through screens and printing forms for me to sign. Within 30 minutes, Rachel's name was gone from everything. I felt lighter walking out of that bank. I went home and spent the next 2 hours changing passwords. Email, Netflix, Amazon, all of it. Then I opened a new checking account, just in my name. I called payroll at work and had them switch my direct deposit to the new account. My hands were shaking again, but this time it felt different. Scary, but also freeing. Like I was taking back something that had always been mine, but I'd let someone else control. Rachel showed up around noon. She was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday. Her makeup was smudged and her hair was messy. She walked straight to the kitchen and tried to use her debit card on her phone. Then she tried again. Then she looked at me. Why isn't my card working? I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee. Because you don't have access to my money anymore. You need to support yourself now. Her face went white, then red. What did you do? I went to the bank this morning. Your name is off all my accounts and credit cards. I changed all the passwords too. Rachel started screaming. Actually screaming, not just yelling. You can't just cut me off without warning. I have bills to pay. I have responsibilities. I stayed calm, which seemed to make her angrier. I've been paying all those bills for 12 years. The entire time you've been spending my money on everyone except me. Your family got $23,000 in gifts last year. I got $40 worth of gas station junk. She was pacing now, her hands pulling at her hair. That's not fair. They're my family. They needed those things. And I'm your husband. I needed to feel like I mattered to you. But you made it clear over and over that I don't. Rachel stopped pacing. She sat down at the table across from me. Her face changed and tears started rolling down her cheeks. I didn't realize the gifts bothered you so much. I'll do better. I promise I will. Just give me another chance. I shook my head. It's too late for promises, Rachel. Your actions over 12 years showed me exactly how much I matter to you. A 25-cent book. That's what I'm worth to you. She grabbed her phone off the table and started dialing. Her hands were shaking, so bad she had to try twice to get the number right. She hit speaker and set the phone between us. It rang 3 times before her dad picked up. Rachel didn't even wait for him to say hello. She started talking fast, her voice all high and panicked, telling Jacob I'd cut her off from all the money without warning, and I was being unreasonable, and he needed to talk sense into me. I sat there drinking my coffee, waiting for Jacob to jump in and defend his daughter like she clearly expected. But he didn't say anything for a long minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and careful. He said my name first, asking if I was there. I told him I was. Then he said something that made Rachel's face go white. He said he thought I had every right to be upset about how things had been going. Rachel stared at the phone like it had just betrayed her. Jacob kept talking. He said he'd been uncomfortable for years watching how Rachel treated me, how she spent thousands on the family but gave me things that seemed almost mean. He said he should have said something a long time ago, but he didn't want to interfere in our marriage. Rachel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jacob said he loved his daughter, but this pattern wasn't right and he understood why I'd finally had enough. Rachel found her voice then. She started yelling at the phone, saying he was supposed to be on her side, asking how he could take my side over hers. Jacob tried to respond, but Rachel just screamed over him and then jabbed the button to end the call. She threw her phone across the kitchen and it hit the wall. The case cracked, but she didn't seem to notice. She turned on me instead, her face red and wet with tears and anger. She said if I wanted a divorce, fine, she'd take half of everything. The house, the savings, my retirement accounts, all of it. I set down my coffee cup and looked at her. I told her most of our assets were purchased with my income alone over the 12 years we'd been together. She worked part-time for minimum wage and contributed almost nothing to the household finances. Her lawyer would have a hard time arguing she deserved half when she'd been essentially living off me while spending my money on everyone but me. Rachel's eyes went even wider. She hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd just assumed she could threaten me with losing half and I'd cave. I stood up from the table. I told her she had 2 weeks to figure out her living situation because I wasn't supporting someone who clearly didn't value me as a partner. She called me cruel. She said I was abandoning her, that I'd promised to take care of her for better or worse. I said worse didn't mean accepting being treated like I was worthless. She needed to leave. Rachel started crying harder, saying she had nowhere to go, no money, no way to survive. I reminded her she could stay with her parents, the same parents she'd spent thousands of dollars on over the years. She could ask them for help for once instead of always taking from me. She called me names then. Said I was selfish and heartless, and she'd made a mistake marrying me. I didn't argue. I just walked out of the kitchen and went upstairs to the bedroom. I locked the door behind me. My phone buzzed a few minutes later. It was Rohit from work. I'd texted him the night before about what happened at Christmas and he was checking in. He said if I needed space, I could stay at his place for a while. I appreciated the offer, but I told him I was keeping the house. Rachel was the one who needed to leave. Rohit said good, that I shouldn't be the one displaced when I'd done nothing wrong. He asked if I needed anything else and I said no, just his friendship, and he told me I had it. The next few days were awful. Rachel didn't leave. She stayed in the house, alternating between screaming at me and crying and begging. She'd wake me up in the middle of the night, pounding on the bedroom door, demanding I restore her access to the money. She promised she'd get a full-time job. She promised she'd be more thoughtful. She promised we could go to counseling. She'd say anything to avoid actual consequences. I stayed firm. I'd spent 12 years being manipulated, and I was done. On January 2nd, I called a divorce attorney named Seth Branson that Rohit had recommended. Seth had me come in that afternoon. His office was downtown in a tall building with a view of the city. He was maybe 50, gray hair, expensive suit, and he got right to business. I laid out everything. The gift disparity, the spending patterns, the 12 years of being treated like I didn't matter. I showed him my documentation, the spreadsheets I'd made tracking Rachel's spending on her family versus what she spent on me. Seth looked through everything carefully. He asked good questions about our finances, about what was in my name versus joint accounts, about Rachel's work history. After about an hour, he leaned back in his chair and told me I had a strong case. The financial dynamics were clearly one-sided, and my documentation was excellent. He said we could push for a settlement that reflected my contributions to the marriage and Rachel's lack of financial investment. I hired him on the spot. Julia called me 2 days later. I was surprised to hear from her directly. She apologized for not speaking up sooner about how Rachel treated me. She said she'd noticed it for years, but didn't think it was her place to interfere. She felt guilty now for staying silent while I was disrespected. I told her she was the only one brave enough to say something at all, even if it took 12 years. She said if I needed her to testify about the gift disparity or anything else, she would. I thanked her and meant it. Rachel found out about Seth somehow. Maybe she saw the paperwork I'd left on my desk. She came into my office at home one evening in mid-January, her face pale and scared. She asked if I was really meeting with a divorce attorney. I said yes. She completely panicked then. She dropped to her knees next to my chair and grabbed my hands, begging me not to do this. She said she'd do anything, change anything, be anyone I needed her to be. She asked for one more chance, just one, and suggested marriage counseling. I looked at her kneeling there and felt nothing but exhaustion. But I agreed to one session, just so I could say I tried everything. The counseling session happened the following week. The therapist was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a notebook she wrote in constantly. She asked us both to explain why we were there. I gave her the short version. 12 years of terrible gifts, financial disparity, feeling undervalued. Rachel cried through the whole thing. When it was Rachel's turn, the therapist asked her to explain her gift-giving choices. Rachel tried. She said she thought I didn't care about gifts, that I wasn't materialistic, that her family needed more support. But even as she said it, the words sounded hollow. The therapist pointed out that I'd clearly communicated my hurt multiple times over the years, according to what I'd just shared. Rachel had no response to that. Then the therapist asked the question that broke everything open. She asked Rachel why she spent $23,000 on her family, but only $40 on me in a single year. Rachel started crying harder. She said she just wanted her family to be happy. The therapist asked why my happiness wasn't equally important. Rachel couldn't answer. She just sat there sobbing into her hands while I stared at the wall and realized this marriage had been over for a long time. I'd just been too afraid to admit it. The therapist looked at me and asked what I wanted to say. I turned to Rachel and told her it wasn't really about the gifts themselves. It was about what they showed me. Every terrible gift was proof that she never thought about me as a person with feelings and preferences. She spent months planning her mom's party, but couldn't spend 5 minutes thinking about what I might actually want. She researched the exact designer bag her sister wanted, but gave me expired coupons and garage sale books. The gifts were just the evidence of something bigger. She didn't consider me worth her time or effort. Rachel's face crumpled and she started nodding, tears streaming down her cheeks. She said she understood now, that she could see how badly she'd hurt me. But I looked at her crying and felt nothing except tired. Understanding now didn't erase 12 years of feeling worthless. The therapist asked if we wanted to schedule another session. Rachel looked at me with desperate hope, but I shook my head. One session was enough. We left the office and walked to our separate cars in silence. Rachel caught up to me in the parking lot and grabbed my arm. She asked if there was any way to fix this, anything she could do to make it right. I pulled my arm free gently and told her the truth. I didn't know if I could ever trust her to value me as a partner. The hurt from 12 years of being treated as less important than her family was too deep. She'd have to completely change who she was as a person, and I wasn't sure that was possible. Rachel asked if I was giving up on us. I said I wasn't giving up. I was accepting reality. She'd shown me for over a decade exactly where I ranked in her life. I finally believed her. She started crying harder and walked back to her car. I drove home alone and called Seth the next morning. He told me to give Rachel formal written notice to vacate the house within 30 days. He said it was important for legal documentation that I'd followed proper procedure. I typed up the notice that afternoon, printed it, and left it on the kitchen counter. Rachel came by that evening to get some clothes and saw the paper. She read it 3 times like she couldn't believe what it said. Then she picked up the notice, grabbed 2 suitcases from the closet, and started packing. She didn't say a word to me, just filled the suitcases with clothes and toiletries and left. I heard her car start in the driveway, and then she was gone. The house felt different immediately. Quiet, but not in a bad way. Peaceful. I walked through the rooms and realized I'd been tense in my own home for years. Always worried about Rachel's mood or her family's needs or the next disappointing gift. Now it was just me, and the silence felt good. Over the next week, Rachel came by a few more times to get her stuff. We barely spoke. She'd text when she was coming, I'd make sure to be busy in another room, and she'd load boxes into her car. By the end of the month, all her things were gone. She'd moved back in with her parents. I changed the Wi-Fi password and took her name off the electric bill. 3 days after Rachel moved out completely, my phone rang with Kyle's number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. He sounded nervous and said he needed to talk to me. He apologized for accepting all those expensive gifts without ever questioning where the money came from or how I was treated. Julia had opened his eyes to how messed up the whole dynamic was. He said he felt guilty for benefiting from my money while I got nothing. He should have said something years ago. I told him I appreciated the call, but I didn't blame him. He didn't create this situation. Rachel did. She made the choice to spend thousands on him and quarters on me, but his acknowledgement meant something. It helped me feel less crazy for finally standing up for myself. Kyle said Julia was right about everything, and he was sorry it took her calling Rachel out publicly for him to see it. We talked for 20 minutes, and it was the first real conversation we'd ever had. Not about Rachel or her family drama, just 2 people talking. He said I was welcome at their house anytime. The next afternoon, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Alyssa standing there holding a small jewelry box. She looked like she'd been crying. She said she needed to talk to me and asked if she could come in. I let her in, and we sat in the living room. She opened the jewelry box and showed me the diamond earrings Rachel had given her for Christmas. She wanted to return them to me. She said this wasn't right, that she couldn't keep them knowing I'd paid for them while getting a garage sale book. I told her to keep the earrings. This wasn't about getting gifts back. It was about being treated with basic respect in my own marriage. Alyssa started crying then, really sobbing. She said she'd known for years that Rachel took me for granted. She'd watched her daughter buy expensive presents for everyone else while giving me trash. But she didn't want to interfere in our marriage. She thought it wasn't her place. Now she felt ashamed that she'd accepted those gifts while watching me receive nothing. She said she was sorry, that she should have said something to Rachel a long time ago. I handed her a tissue and told her Rachel was an adult who made her own choices. Alyssa didn't control what Rachel did, but I appreciated her acknowledgement of what happened. It meant more than she knew. Alyssa stood up and hugged me hard. She said I deserved so much better than how Rachel treated me. She hoped I'd find someone who valued me the way I deserved. Then she left, still clutching the jewelry box. A few days later, Julia texted me a screenshot. Rachel had posted something vague on social media about being abandoned and betrayed by someone she trusted. The post made it sound like I was the villain who'd cruelly left her for no reason. Julia had commented directly on the post calling Rachel out for playing victim when she'd spent 12 years treating me like garbage. The comment had 15 likes already, including from Kyle, Lisa, and 2 of Rachel's cousins. I didn't respond to Rachel's post, but I appreciated Julia standing up for me publicly the same way she had at Christmas. The truth was getting out there despite Rachel's attempts to control the story. That weekend, I had an appointment with Laura Connell, a financial advisor Seth had recommended. I wanted to plan my financial future as a single person. Laura looked through my income, savings, and investment accounts. She seemed impressed with my salary and how much I'd managed to save despite Rachel's spending. She helped me set up new investment accounts in my name only and created a budget that included money for myself. Actual money for things I wanted, not just bills and Rachel's family gifts. The concept felt weird after years of funding everyone else's happiness. Laura asked what I wanted to do with my money now that it was mine again. I realized I had no idea. I'd spent so long paying for other people that I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. 2 weeks later, Seth called to tell me the divorce papers were ready to file. I met him at his office on a cold Tuesday morning in mid-January and signed everything he put in front of me. Seth explained that Rachel would be served at her parents' house since that's where she'd been staying. He asked if I was sure about this decision, and I told him I'd never been more sure about anything. The papers were filed that afternoon. Rachel was served the next day. My phone started ringing around 3 in the afternoon, and I saw her name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately. Then again. On the 4th call, I answered. Rachel was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She begged me to reconsider, said she'd change, said she'd do anything. I told her calmly that I'd made my decision, and I was sticking with it. She cried harder and asked how I could throw away 12 years together. I reminded her that she threw away 12 years by treating me like I didn't matter while spending thousands on everyone else. She hung up on me. That weekend, Lisa called, Rachel's sister. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Lisa said she needed to apologize for accepting that $800 designer purse without ever thinking about where the money came from or how I was treated. She'd been talking to Julia a lot lately, and it opened her eyes to how badly Rachel had treated me over the years. Lisa said she felt guilty for benefiting from Rachel's spending while I got nothing. She offered to testify on my behalf if the divorce got messy, and I needed witnesses. I thanked her and told her I appreciated the apology more than she knew. It meant something that Rachel's own sister recognized how wrong this had been. The divorce proceedings started moving forward in late January. Rachel hired an attorney who immediately tried to argue for spousal support. Her lawyer claimed that Rachel had become accustomed to a certain lifestyle during our marriage and deserved continued financial support given her part-time income. Seth was ready for this. He'd prepared detailed documentation showing that Rachel spent $23,000 on gifts for her family in a single year while contributing almost nothing to household expenses. The records proved she had money available, but chose not to spend it on our partnership or our life together. She spent it on everyone except me. Rachel's attorney looked uncomfortable when Seth presented bank statements showing every expensive gift Rachel had purchased for her family members. The lawyer tried to argue that gift-giving was different from household contributions, but Seth pointed out that someone claiming poverty for spousal support purposes shouldn't have thousands to spend on luxury items for others. The argument didn't go well for Rachel's side. In early February, Rachel sent me a photo of a paycheck. She'd gotten a full-time job at a different flower shop that paid almost twice what her old part-time position did. The text that came with the photo said she was proving she could change and support herself. I stared at that paycheck and felt nothing but frustration. She should have done this years ago when I first asked her to contribute more to our household. Now that she was facing consequences, suddenly she could find a better job. It was too little too late. Around the same time, I started going to individual therapy. Seth had recommended it, and I figured I needed to process 12 years of being undervalued by someone who was supposed to love me. My therapist was a woman in her 50s who listened without judgment as I explained the whole situation. She asked why I thought I'd accepted that treatment for so long. I didn't have a good answer at first. Over several sessions, she helped me recognize patterns from my childhood as an adopted kid. I'd spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of love, trying to earn my place in my adoptive family, even though they never made me feel that way. I'd carried that same pattern into my marriage with Rachel, constantly trying to prove my worth by providing everything she needed while accepting scraps in return. The therapy sessions were hard but helpful, and then I started understanding that I deserved better than what I'd accepted. One Thursday evening, Rohit convinced me to join him at a work social event. It was just drinks and appetizers with people from our engineering firm, but I hadn't done anything social in weeks. I almost said no, but Rohit wouldn't take no for an answer. He picked me up and we went together. I actually had fun talking to people without worrying about Rachel's needs or her family's expectations. I laughed at jokes and told stories about projects at work and realized how much of myself I'd lost trying to be enough for someone who never valued me. On the drive home, Rohit told me I seemed lighter, more like the person he'd known before I got so deep into my marriage with Rachel. The next week, Julia texted to invite me to dinner at her and Kyle's house. It would be the first time I'd socialized with Rachel's family without Rachel present. I hesitated, but Julia insisted, saying they wanted to support me through this. I showed up on Saturday evening with a bottle of wine. Julia answered the door and immediately handed me a small gift bag. Inside was a nice bottle of wine I'd mentioned liking months ago at a family gathering. She'd remembered and bought it specifically for me as a host gift, even though I was the guest. The gesture hit me harder than I expected, and I felt my eyes water. Julia hugged me and said I deserved people who paid attention to what I liked. Dinner was comfortable and easy. Kyle apologized again for not speaking up sooner about how Rachel treated me. We talked about work and sports and normal things that had nothing to do with divorce or gift giving. It felt good to just exist as myself without the weight of my failing marriage. Rachel found out about the dinner somehow. She called Julia the next day and accused her family of choosing me over her. Julia told me later that she'd responded bluntly, saying they were choosing to support the person who was wronged, not the person who did the wronging. Rachel apparently lost it and said Julia was a terrible sister-in-law. Julia told her that Rachel had been a terrible wife, and until she could admit that, they had nothing more to discuss. Rachel stopped speaking to Julia entirely after that. The divorce mediation happened in mid-February. Rachel's attorney pushed hard for half of the house equity, arguing that Rachel had contributed to the marriage in non-financial ways. Seth argued back that since I'd paid the entire mortgage and the full down payment with my income alone, Rachel's claim to the house was limited at best. He presented documentation showing every mortgage payment, every property tax bill, every home repair, all paid from my accounts. Rachel sat across the table from me crying while the lawyers negotiated. We finally reached a settlement where Rachel would get a small payout of $15,000 and I would keep the house. It was far less than half the equity, but more than she deserved given that she'd contributed nothing to the purchase or maintenance. Rachel signed the agreement through tears. 3 days later, we had the final signing appointment. Rachel showed up looking exhausted, her eyes red from crying. She signed the divorce papers while sobbing through the whole process. The lawyer had to pause twice, so Rachel could compose herself enough to write her signature. When it was done, our 12-year relationship was officially over. I felt sad watching her cry, but I also felt relieved, like I was finally free from constantly proving my worth to someone who refused to see it. The week after the divorce finalized, I called a locksmith to change all the locks on the house. The guy showed up in a beat-up truck and spent 2 hours installing new deadbolts and door handles throughout the place. He was friendly and chatty while he worked, making small talk about the weather and local sports teams. When he finished and handed me the new keys, he said I seemed a lot happier than most people he worked with during divorces. That comment stuck with me because he was right. I felt lighter than I had in years, like I could finally breathe without the weight of Rachel's indifference crushing my chest. After he left, I walked through every room of the house, testing each new lock and realizing this space was truly mine now. I started redecorating that same weekend. I took down all the photos of Rachel and her family that lined the hallways and filled the living room shelves. I packed up the decorative pillows she'd bought that I always thought were ugly. I donated the cheap furniture she'd picked out from discount stores while spending thousands on gifts for her relatives. I bought a new couch, a real leather one that cost more than I'd ever spent on furniture before, and I didn't feel guilty about it for even a second. I painted the bedroom a deep blue color I'd always wanted instead of the beige Rachel insisted on because it was neutral. Each change I made felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been buried under 12 years of trying to make someone happy who never valued me anyway. A few days after I finished painting, Jacob called me out of the blue. My phone showed his name and I hesitated before answering, not sure what to expect. His voice was warm when I picked up, asking how I was doing and if I needed anything. He told me he was proud of how I'd handled everything with dignity, despite having every right to be angry and bitter. He said he wished he'd spoken up years ago about how Rachel treated me, but he'd convinced himself it wasn't his place to interfere in our marriage. He apologized for accepting expensive gifts from Rachel while watching her give me nothing, saying he should have realized sooner what was happening. Then he said something that surprised me more than anything else. He hoped I'd stay in touch with him and Alyssa despite the divorce, because they'd always considered me family regardless of what Rachel did. I told Jacob I'd like that very much. He and Alyssa were never the problem, and I appreciated how they'd handled this whole situation with honesty and support. They could have taken Rachel's side automatically because she was their daughter, but instead they'd been willing to see the truth and call her out on it. That meant more to me than Jacob probably realized. He invited me to a family barbecue they were planning for the spring, specifically noting that Rachel wouldn't be there because she was still angry with them for not supporting her during the divorce. The invitation caught me off guard, and I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Even after everything that happened, they still wanted me around. I accepted immediately, already looking forward to it. Work became my main focus through February and into March. I threw myself into projects and stayed late most nights, partly because I was avoiding the empty house, and partly because I genuinely enjoyed the work without the stress of my failing marriage hanging over me. My boss noticed the extra effort and the quality of my output. In early March, she called me into her office and I thought maybe I was in trouble for something. Instead, she offered me a promotion to senior engineer with a significant raise that brought my salary up to $155,000. I accepted on the spot, barely able to process what was happening. That evening, I took Rohit out to an expensive steakhouse downtown to celebrate. We ordered appetizers and the best cuts of meat on the menu, and a bottle of wine that cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. For the first time in 12 years, I spent money on myself, and someone who actually appreciated me without feeling guilty about it. Rohit raised his glass and toasted to my freedom and my success, and I realized how good it felt to be valued by the people in my life. The meal cost over $300, and I didn't care at all because every bite felt like proof that I deserved good things. A week later, I got a long email from Rachel. The subject line just said, "I'm sorry," and I almost deleted it without reading. But curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. She apologized for everything, listing out specific examples of how badly she'd treated me over the years. She explained that she was in therapy now, and her therapist had helped her realize how she'd taken me completely for granted and prioritized her family over the person who was actually supporting her life. She said she understood why I left and didn't blame me for it. She hoped I'd find someone who treated me the way I deserved to be treated all along, with thoughtfulness and appreciation and genuine care. The email was long and detailed and seemed sincere. I sat with it for a day before responding. I wrote back a brief but kind message, thanking her for the apology and wishing her well in her therapy and personal growth. I meant it genuinely because I didn't hate Rachel. I just couldn't stay married to someone who made me feel worthless for over a decade. Her growth was good for her, but it didn't change what had already happened between us or make me want to go back. I hoped she'd treat her next partner better, whoever that might be. Julia texted me a few weeks later asking if we could meet for coffee. We sat at a corner table in a busy cafe, and she told me that Rachel had been making genuine changes in her life. She was treating her family members with more consideration, actually asking about their lives instead of just expecting things from them. She'd gotten more financially responsible, working full-time now and paying for her own expenses instead of relying on her parents. Julia said she was genuinely proud of the progress Rachel was making, but she wanted me to know so I wouldn't think Rachel's apology was empty words. I told Julia I was glad Rachel was growing and becoming a better person. That was good for her and good for everyone around her. But it didn't change the 12 years of damage to our relationship or make me regret my decision to leave. Some things you can't fix even with genuine change and growth. Julia understood and gave me a hug before we left, telling me I looked happier than she'd ever seen me. April brought warmer weather and a strange new energy in my life. I started dating casually, nothing serious, just enjoying getting to know new people who saw me as valuable from the start. I went on dates with women I met through apps and friends of friends, and it was amazing how different everything felt. These women wanted to spend time with me and actually put effort into planning dates and conversations. One woman insisted on paying for dinner because I'd driven across town to meet her. Another brought me flowers on our second date just because she thought I'd like them. The contrast to my marriage was so stark it almost hurt. I wasn't looking for anything serious yet, still processing the end of my 12-year relationship, but it felt good to be treated like someone worth pursuing. In late April, I attended a work conference in the city about new engineering technologies and innovations. The sessions were interesting, but the real surprise came during a coffee break on the second day. I was standing in line for coffee when the woman in front of me turned around and we almost collided. She apologized quickly, and we started talking while waiting for our drinks. Her name was Maria, and she was also an engineer at a different company. We hit it off immediately, talking about work projects and shared frustrations with certain technologies and industry trends. She was independent and confident, with an easy laugh and sharp sense of humor. We ended up sitting together for the rest of the conference sessions, whispering comments to each other during boring presentations. On our first actual date a week later, she insisted on splitting the check even though I offered to pay. She planned creative dates that showed she was actually paying attention to my interests. She took me to a vintage bookstore because I'd mentioned loving to read, and to a local brewery that specialized in craft beers I'd said I wanted to try. Every date felt balanced and equal, like we were both putting in effort to get to know each other. Maria and I started seeing each other regularly through April and into May. I was cautious about moving too fast, still carrying the scars from my marriage and not wanting to rush into anything serious. Maria was patient and understanding about my past. I told her about Rachel and the divorce on our third date, expecting her to run for the hills, but instead she listened carefully and told me she understood why I needed to take things slow. She never pushed for more than I was ready to give, and that made me trust her even more. When my birthday came around in May, I didn't expect much. I told Maria it was coming up but tried to downplay it, not wanting to set myself up for disappointment after so many years of terrible gifts from Rachel. Maria showed up at my door that evening with a wrapped package that looked like it had taken time and care to prepare. Inside was a first edition of my favorite book, one I'd mentioned loving during one of our early conversations. She'd tracked it down online from a rare book dealer and had it shipped carefully. I held the book in my hands and felt tears starting to form, because someone had finally cared enough to remember what I actually liked and put real effort into finding something meaningful. Maria hugged me and said she just wanted to make me happy, and I realized that was exactly what she'd done. A couple weeks later, Julia called me to say that Rachel had been asking about me through the family grapevine and had heard I was seeing someone. I didn't really care what Rachel thought anymore, but the next day I got a text from her that surprised me. She wrote that she heard I was dating someone new, and she wanted me to know she was happy for me and hoped this person treated me the way I deserved. She said she meant it sincerely and wasn't trying to get back together, just wanted to wish me well. I stared at that text for a long time because it was the most mature thing Rachel had ever said to me in 12 years. I texted back a simple thank you and told her I appreciated the message. It didn't change anything between us and we'd never get back together, but I could see she was actually trying to grow as a person. That was good for her even if it came too late for us. Jacob and Alyssa's anniversary party happened in early June at their house. Maria had a work thing so she couldn't come with me, which was probably for the best since Rachel would be there. I showed up with a nice bottle of wine and some flowers for Alyssa. Rachel arrived about 20 minutes after me, and we saw each other across the backyard where everyone was gathered. She gave me a small wave and I nodded back. We didn't seek each other out or try to have a conversation. Later in the evening, we ended up near the food table at the same time and exchanged brief hellos. She asked how I was doing and I said good, asked her the same and she said she was okay. The whole interaction lasted maybe 30 seconds and then we moved to different parts of the yard. Julia found me by the grill and pulled me aside near the fence. She looked me up and down with this big smile and told me I looked really good, that I seemed so much happier than I'd been in years. I told her I felt happier, that dating Maria had shown me what it was like to be with someone who actually valued me. Julia hugged me tight and said she was proud of me for choosing myself. The following week, I brought Maria to a happy hour with my work friends at this bar near our office building. Rohit was there along with 3 other engineers from my team. Maria fit right in with everyone, laughing at their jokes and contributing to conversations about work projects and weekend plans. She told funny stories about her own job and asked genuine questions about what everyone did. After about an hour, Rohit pulled me aside to the bar while Maria was talking to the others. He ordered us another round and then turned to me with this serious look. He said he'd known me for 8 years and worked with me through my whole marriage to Rachel, and he'd never seen me this relaxed and happy with someone. He told me that what I had with Maria was what a healthy relationship actually looked like, where both people put in equal effort and treated each other with respect. I felt something shift inside me when he said that, because I was starting to really believe I deserved this kind of treatment, instead of just hoping for it. In mid-June, Kyle called me one evening sounding excited and nervous at the same time. He said he and Julia had some news they wanted to share with me in person. I drove over to their place and found them sitting together on their couch with matching grins. Julia blurted out that she was pregnant before Kyle could even start his planned announcement. They were both so happy, and I congratulated them with hugs. Then Kyle got serious and said they'd been talking about godparents, and they wanted to ask me to be the godfather. I was completely surprised and touched by the request. I asked if they were sure, and Julia said absolutely, that I'd always been there for Kyle, and I was the person they trusted most. I accepted and felt myself getting emotional because it meant so much that they still considered me family, even after the divorce. Rachel came by their house later that evening. I found out from Julia the next day. Julia told me Rachel congratulated them on the pregnancy, but got quiet when she heard about them asking me to be godfather. According to Julia, Rachel looked really sad and said something about how she'd messed everything up. Julia told her gently that yeah, she had, and now she had to live with losing someone who would have done anything for her. July came, and I decided it was time for Maria to meet Jacob and Alyssa properly. I'd mentioned them to her before and explained that even though I was divorcing Rachel, her parents had always treated me well, and I wanted to maintain that relationship. Maria was totally understanding and even seemed excited to meet them. We drove to their house on a Saturday afternoon, and Alyssa answered the door with a huge smile. She hugged me, and then welcomed Maria warmly, telling her she'd heard wonderful things about her. Jacob came out from the kitchen and shook Maria's hand, then pulled me in for a hug. We all sat in their living room and talked for over an hour. Jacob told embarrassing stories about me from when Rachel and I first started dating, like the time I tried to fix their garbage disposal and flooded their kitchen. Alyssa showed Maria photos from various family gatherings over the years. Maria handled all of it with total grace, laughing at the right moments and asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested. She didn't act weird about hearing stories from my marriage or seeing old photos. After Maria excused herself to use the bathroom, Alyssa leaned over and quietly told me that Maria was a keeper, that she could see how good we were together. Jacob agreed and said I looked lighter somehow, less weighed down. When we left a couple hours later, Alyssa hugged Maria and told her to come back anytime. The divorce was completely finalized in mid-August. Seth called me on a Tuesday morning to tell me the judge had signed everything, and it was officially over. I thanked him for all his work, and then sat at my desk for a few minutes just processing that my 12-year relationship was legally done. I didn't feel sad exactly, more like relieved that I could fully move forward now. That weekend, I took Maria on a trip to celebrate my new beginning. We drove 3 hours north to this mountain area with great hiking trails and stayed at a bed and breakfast run by this older couple. We spent Saturday hiking up to a waterfall and then came back to the inn for dinner. The owners had prepared this amazing meal, and we sat on their back porch watching the sunset. I spent money on nice wine and a fancy dessert and didn't feel guilty once about treating myself and Maria to something special. Sunday, we did another hike and then drove home tired but happy. The whole weekend, I felt free in a way I hadn't in years, like I could finally just enjoy my life without constantly worrying about whether I was doing enough or being enough for someone who didn't appreciate it anyway. September brought another message from Rachel. She texted me one evening saying she had some news to share. She'd been offered a better job in a city 4 hours away, and she was taking it. She said she needed a fresh start somewhere new, where she wasn't constantly reminded of her mistakes. She thanked me for 12 years together, and said she was sorry one last time for not appreciating me when she had the chance. She wrote that she hoped I was happy with Maria, and that she genuinely wished me the best in my new life. I read the message a few times and then wrote back telling her I wished her genuine happiness in her new city and her new job. I meant it too because I didn't hate Rachel. I just couldn't be married to someone who made me feel worthless. Her moving away felt like the right thing for both of us to fully heal and move on. Over the next few weeks, I noticed something had shifted in how I thought about Rachel and our marriage. I was in therapy one afternoon in late September, and my therapist asked how I felt when I thought about Rachel now. I realized I didn't feel angry anymore or hurt or bitter. I just felt neutral about the whole thing, like I could look back and see clearly that we weren't right for each other. She needed to learn how to value people, and I needed to learn how to value myself. The therapy had definitely helped me work through all the hurt and resentment, but what really healed me was finally choosing to put myself first. I'd spent 12 years trying to be enough for someone who would never see my worth, and now I was with someone who saw it clearly from day one. Maria and I had been dating for 6 months by October, and we started talking seriously about moving in together. She brought it up first, saying her lease was ending and she was thinking about what to do next. I told her I'd been thinking the same thing and asked if she wanted to move into my house. She said yes, but only if we split all the expenses equally because she wanted to be a true partner, not someone I supported. We sat down and worked out a fair division of the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and everything else. It felt so different from my marriage where I paid for everything, and Rachel contributed almost nothing. Maria and I went furniture shopping together because she wanted to bring some of her own stuff, but also pick out new things that reflected both our tastes. She insisted on paying for half of everything we bought. When we finished setting up her home office in the spare bedroom, she surprised me with a housewarming gift. It was this beautiful piece of art for my office, an original painting from a local artist. She'd noticed I kept looking at it when we visited a gallery a few weeks earlier, and she went back and bought it for me. The fact that she paid attention to what I actually liked, and then put thought and money into getting it for me, made me feel valued in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. Julia went into labor in early November on a Tuesday night. Kyle called me around 11 and said they were heading to the hospital. I met them there an hour later and waited with Kyle's parents and Alyssa in the waiting room. Jacob brought coffee for everyone, and we all sat there nervously waiting for updates. Kyle came out around 3 in the morning to tell us Julia had delivered a healthy baby girl. We all went in to see them, and I held my new goddaughter for the first time. She was tiny and perfect, and I felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude that Kyle and Julia trusted me with this role in their daughter's life. Rachel sent flowers to the hospital the next day with a card congratulating them, but she didn't visit. Julia told me later that Rachel had texted saying she didn't want to make things awkward by showing up, and Julia appreciated her respecting the boundaries we'd all established. I was grateful too because everyone had been so mature through this whole transition from my marriage ending to my new relationship with Maria, and it made everything easier than it could have been. Thanksgiving came, and I hosted dinner at my house for the first time ever. Maria helped me clean and decorate the day before, and we set up the dining room table with chairs borrowed from Rohit, since we needed to fit 8 people plus the baby carrier. I cooked a turkey using my mom's old recipe that I'd saved from years ago, and Maria made her family's traditional stuffing. Rohit showed up first with wine and this fancy cheese board he'd put together. Jacob and Alyssa arrived next, bringing pies and hugging me like I was still part of their family despite the divorce being final. Julia and Kyle came last because the baby had a diaper situation right as they were leaving their house. I held my goddaughter while Julia got settled, and the tiny weight of her in my arms made me feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We ate dinner with everyone talking and laughing, passing dishes around and refilling glasses. Kyle told embarrassing stories about Rachel and him as kids, but it didn't hurt to hear her name anymore. Julia asked Maria about her engineering work, and they bonded over dealing with sexist coworkers. Jacob told me privately in the kitchen that he was proud of how I'd handled everything and rebuilt my life. I looked around my dining room at these people who actually cared about me, who showed up because they wanted to be there, and I felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude that almost made me cry into my mashed potatoes. Maria and I had a serious talk in December while sitting on my couch after work one evening. She'd been quiet all day, and I asked if something was wrong. She took my hand and told me she was falling in love with me because of how kind and generous I was, how I treated everyone with respect and thoughtfulness. But then she made sure I understood that she valued me for who I was as a person, not for what I could provide financially or materially. She said she'd been worried about telling me because she didn't want me to think she was like Rachel, using me for money or security. That distinction hit me hard because it was exactly what I needed to hear. Rachel had never valued me as a person, only as a wallet. Maria saw me completely differently and made sure I knew the difference. I kissed her and told her I was falling in love with her too, and we sat there holding each other while snow started falling outside the window. Christmas Eve arrived and Maria had been secretive about my gift for weeks. We decided to exchange our main presents on Christmas Eve so we could spend Christmas morning relaxing instead of rushing through gift opening. She handed me a wrapped box that was heavier than I expected. I opened it carefully and found a custom photo album she'd made, filled with printed pictures of us from the past year. Every page had her handwriting on it, little notes about her favorite memories with me. The first page showed us at that work conference where we met, and she'd written about how she knew immediately that I was someone special. Another page had pictures from our hiking trip, with a note about how much she loved watching me be genuinely happy in nature. The last page was blank except for her handwriting that said this was for future memories we'd make together. I actually started crying while reading through it, because someone had put this much thought and effort into showing me I mattered. Then I gave her the diamond earrings she'd mentioned loving when we walked past a jewelry store months ago. She gasped when she opened the box, and her eyes filled with tears too. She put them on immediately and hugged me, so tight I could barely breathe. Christmas morning, I woke up next to Maria in my bed, in the house that was finally completely mine with no trace of Rachel left anywhere. We made coffee and sat by the tree we'd decorated together, surrounded by ornaments we'd picked out as a couple. The lights reflected off Maria's new earrings, and she smiled at me in that way that made me feel valued and loved. We opened a few more smaller gifts we'd gotten each other, thoughtful things that showed we paid attention to what the other person actually liked and wanted. I gave her a book by her favorite author that hadn't been released yet because I'd pre-ordered it months ago when she mentioned wanting to read it. She gave me a nice watch to replace the cheap one I'd been wearing for years because she'd noticed the band was falling apart. We spent the whole morning in our pajamas just being together, and I thought about how different this was from every Christmas with Rachel. I'd left my marriage broken and convinced I wasn't worth loving properly, but sitting there with Maria, I understood that leaving Rachel was the best decision I'd ever made. It taught me that I deserved to be valued and appreciated and loved by someone who showed it through both their words and their actions every single day, and I finally had that.